So, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Part 3. Now, if you remember, in Parts 1 and 2, Lucy and all her friends had found their way into Narnia, and Edmund had met the White Witch. Now they were having tea with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, and they suddenly noticed that Edmund had gone missing. Edmund was indeed making his way to the White Witch's house. After a long and bitterly cold walk through snowy, icy drifts, he came to it at last. The iron gates stood wide open, and he made his way cautiously through a courtyard filled with stone statues. Across the threshold lay a great wolf, and it rose, the hair bristling along its back, and it growled, "Who is there?" "If you please, sir," said Edmund, trembling, "I'm the boy that Her Majesty met in the wood a few days ago." The wolf vanished into the house, and Edmund followed. "How dare you come alone?" cried the witch in a terrible voice. "I've brought the others quite close, Your Majesty," stuttered Edmund. "They're with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver." A cruel smile came over the witch's face, until Edmund told her all he had heard before leaving the Beaver's house. "What? Aslan?" cried the Queen, and clapped her hands. Instantly the dwarf appeared. "Make ready our sledge," she ordered. Now, in the meantime, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were leading the children along the river bank. At last, when Lucy was so tired that she was almost asleep on her feet, they came to a snug little hole where they could spend the night. They awoke to the sound of jingling bells. Mr. Beaver was out of the cave like a flash, and then they heard him shout, "It's all right! Come out, everyone! It isn't her!" They all scrambled up the steep bank, and there, on his sledge, sat Father Christmas, big and glad. "I've come at last," he said. "The White Witch has kept me out for a long time, but her magic is weakening. Aslan is on the move. And now for your presents," he smiled. "Mrs. Beaver, a new sewing machine is waiting for you at home. And Mr. Beaver, you will find your new dam is quite finished." The kind creatures were so pleased they could hardly speak. Then Father Christmas gave Peter a magnificent sword and a shield, and for Susan there was a bow and a quiver of arrows and a little horn, and last of all he gave Lucy a clear crystal bottle and a small dagger. "In this bottle," he said, "there is a cordial made of the juice of the fire flowers. If you or any of your friends is ever hurt, a few drops of this will restore them." And then he cried out, "Merry Christmas! Long live the true King!" And then Father Christmas drove out of sight. It's time we were moving on," said Mr. Beaver. Edmund, meanwhile, had been having a horrible time. When he asked the White Witch for Turkish delight, she merely said, "Silence, fool!" And as they sped through the darkness, he felt colder and more miserable than ever before in his life. It didn't look now as if she intended to make him a king, and he longed to be with the others. At last, morning came, and they were travelling along in daylight. Suddenly, the witch stopped the sledge. Nearby sat a merry party celebrating the return of Father Christmas. In fury, the witch turned them all into stone, and Edmund, for the first time, felt sorry for someone besides himself. As they raced on again, Edmund noticed that he was feeling much less cold, and soon patches of green began to show through the snow. The sledge gradually came to a halt, and the witch ordered them to leave it behind and walk. When Edmund heard birds singing, his heart leapt, for he realized that the witch's cruel winter was over. Miles away, the other children were walking into what seemed a delicious dream, through warm sunlight and into green thickets and through mossy glades. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them up a hill. At the top of it stood the stone table, and there and nearby all sorts of wonderful creatures were gathered around Aslan himself. Centaurs and unicorns and wood nymphs and water sprites and deer and great birds. The children could hardly look into the lion's royal solemn eyes, for he was both good and terrible all at the same time. Finally, Peter stepped forward and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. And welcome, He-Beaver and She-Beaver." His voice was deep and rich. "Ah, but where is the fourth?" "He has betrayed them and joined the White Witch," said Mr. Beaver. "Please, Aslan, can anything be done to save Edmund?" said Lucy. "All shall be done," said Aslan, and then he said to Peter, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you the castle of Cair Paravel, for you are the firstborn and will be High King of Narnia over all the rest." Below them in the evening light, where Narnia met the sea, the castle shone like a great star. But suddenly a noise broke the silence. "It is your sister's horn," said Aslan. Running towards the sound, Peter saw creatures scattering in every direction, and then he saw Susan swing herself up into a tree, followed by a huge grey wolf, snapping and snarling at her feet. Peter did not feel very brave, but he rushed straight up to the wolf, aimed a slash of his sword at his side. Quick as lightning it turned on him. After a short fight, Peter managed to plunge his sword into its heart, and a moment later the wolf lay dead. "Quick!" shouted Aslan. "Creatures, centaurs, eagles! I see another wolf. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam." Instantly a dozen of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter shakily wiped his sword clean on the grass. "Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And then Aslan struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter, Wolfsbane." After Edmund had been made to walk further than he'd thought possible, the witch at last halted in a dark valley, and at that moment a wolf rushed up to them, snarling, "They're all at the stone table. They have killed my captain. Fly, fly." "No," said the witch. "Summon all our people. Get out the giants, the ghouls, the ogres, and the werewolves, and we will fight." Edmund found himself being forced to his feet by the dwarf and roughly tied to a tree. The witch muttered, "4 thrones in Cair Paravel? But how would it be if only there were 3 that were filled?" Edmund heard the awful sound of a knife being sharpened. Then suddenly there was a drumming of hooves and a beating of wings, and Edmund felt himself being untied. Strong arms were round him, and kind voices said, Steady now. And who's got the witch? Do you mean she's escaped? For to their surprise, the witch had vanished. But just at that moment, Edmund fainted. And presently, the creatures all set off back to the stone table, carrying Edmund with them. Part 4 next time.